All right, guys. What is up? Welcome to the live stream. We're going to be doing a little bit of, I guess, if you consider this a podcast or whatever. I haven't done one of these in a while, at least by myself. We might have a couple of people on to discuss what is going on. But the big story that just came out about 30 minutes ago, about maybe less than an hour ago, is that the United States of America has officially boycotted the 2022 Olympics. Now, I've had a couple of people tell me, well, it's a diplomatic boycott. It's not a true boycott. A boycott is a boycott. So I had a discussion earlier with a friend of mine. He basically said, is trying to help, but this tweet isn't true. And I said that the United States boycotted the 2022 Olympics. And he said they just won't send government officials. Athletes will still compete, which is true. That's why it is a diplomatic boycott. The difference here is that in 1980, if you're familiar with Olympic boycotts, the last time that there was a boycott of an Olympic, I believe, was in 1980, whenever the United States of America essentially said that we will not send any government officials to. Well, in 1980, there was essentially a boycott in which the United States did not send their players and government officials. So that was a full on boycott. What's going on now is that there will be a diplomatic boycott. That essentially means we are not going to send any representatives of the US government to Beijing to protest the human rights abuses that are going on in China. What human rights abuses are going on there? The suppression of Hong Kong, the Uyghur genocide that is currently happening, and you may say, "Oh, well, I mean, there might not be a genocide." Oh, it's a genocide. There is currently a genocide going on in Xinjiang, and if you want to deny that there is a genocide, I would love to have you on to debate about this genocide that is currently happening. Um, what are your guys' thoughts on the United States boycotting these Olympics? Do you believe that it was a good idea? Do you believe it was a bad idea? We're going to be looking at a couple of articles today from CNN and the New York Times to talk about the boycott. And again, you may say, well, it's not a true boycott. A boycott's a boycott. Come on. Like it's still a boycott. Yeah, we're still sending our Olympic athletes uh to compete in these Olympics. So it's not like a full boycott, but it's a boycott. Like I don't know how you're not understanding whether this is a uh how this is not a boycott. And it's like, oh well, it's not a true boycott because we're still sending our people there. Yes, I understand that, but that's not the point of what It's like going completely over your head if you seriously think that um if there's a difference there. It's still a boycott. Anyway, let's go ahead and read some of these articles from the New York Times and CNN. No, it's not a boycott. It's like slapping someone across the face a war. Uh, Whatever. Still a boycott, nonetheless. So let's go ahead and look at this. So we're going to have a couple of articles today. We're also going to be talking about Ukraine as well. So the United States will not send government officials to Beijing Olympics. Athletes will still be able to compete in the Winter Games in Beijing, but the diplomatic boycott is a response to human rights abuses in Xinjiang. And then we have the Biden administration will not send any American government officials to the 2022 Winter Olympics in Beijing, making official a diplomatic boycott to pressure China from human rights abuses. Jen Psaki, the White House press secretary, said that while American athletes would be able to compete in the Winter Games in Beijing, there would be no delegation of American officials. She said the boycott was a response to human rights abuses in Xinjiang. This is just an indication that it cannot be business as usual. This does not mean that the end of the concerns. This does not mean that this is the end of the concerns that we will raise about human rights abuses. We feel this sends a clear message, she later added. The announcement comes 1 weeks after President Biden said the administration was considering a diplomatic boycott of the Winter Games in February, a break from tradition of using a delegation to show support for American athletes and country hosting the Olympics. Diplomatic boycott has been described by some critics of China in Congress as a way to hold Beijing accountable while not punishing American Olympians. Other more hawkish members of Congress, including Senator Tom Cotton, Republican of Arkansas, have called for a total boycott of the Winter Games, the Beijing Games. I don't think we felt it was the right step to penalize athletes who have been training, preparing for this moment, Misaki said. Mr. Biden said raised the possibility of not sending the American delegation days after having a virtual meeting with China's leader Xi Jinping. That this was meant to calm boiling tensions between the two nations. Both Democrats and Republicans in Congress, as well as human rights advocates, have called on the White House to use Winter Games to pressure Beijing over abuses against the Uyghur community and a crackdown on free speech in Hong Kong, a clear violation of the joint statement between the United Kingdom and the People's Republic of China, which we will actually talk about, which about how China now views that agreement between the United Kingdom and China. We will talk about that before we go on to Ukraine. The calls for the boycott have only intensified after the disappearance from public life of tennis star Peng Shuai, who accused the top Communist Party leader of sexual assault. Senator Bob Menendez, Democrat of New Jersey, and the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee called the boycott a powerful rebuke of the Chinese Communist Party's campaign of genocide in Xinjiang. This boycott is a necessary step to demonstrate our unwavering commitment of human rights in the face of the Chinese government's unconscionable abuses. I may be saying that wrong. Mr. Menendez said that, adding that he hoped that other nations would join the United States, which I am probably looking forward to. Me being 10 minutes from China. Yeah, let's go. Quackshot, what is your thoughts on this boycott with you being stationed so close to China? This boycott is a necessary step to demonstrate our unwavering commitment to human rights in the face of Chinese government's unconscionable abuses, and hope that other nations would join the United States. Ms. Saki said the administration officials made Beijing aware of the diplomatic boycott before Monday's announcement. China's foreign ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian previously said that those calling for a boycott were grandstanding. If the U.S. insists and willfully clinging to its course, China will take resolute countermeasures. Oh boy, that is we're gonna see what China's response to this boycott is in the coming days. It appears that the administration will move forward with the boycott without other allies. European nations are under pressure, but have not made a decision on any potential diplomatic boycott. So, if the United States has done this, then we may be seeing places like the Baltic states, maybe the European Union will stage a diplomatic boycott. The United Kingdom could follow suit. Japan, South Korea, a lot of U.S. allies could follow suit after the United States. So if the United States could do it, I feel that the United States could be the first domino to fall in terms of the Beijing Olympics. Quackshot, he's asking for you. I will let you reveal that. I don't want to dox my own subscribers. Yeah, dox. Even though I'm only saying the country. Secretary of State Antony Blinken told the New York Times last month that the United States was discussing with allies how they were thinking about participation in the Olympics. He called it an active conversation. The Olympic and Paralympic Committee previously said that in a statement that it did not support a boycott preventing American athletes from competing in Beijing. The announcement of the boycott also comes ahead of Mr. Biden's virtual Global Democracy Summit later this week, an effort to take a public stand against authoritarianism and corruption. China was not among the more than 100 countries invited to the summit. So this is the biggest thing about the New York Times. This is the biggest thing about the Olympics that are being held. So, if you remember, before World War II, There was a Olympic game that was held by Nazi Germany at the time. In 1936, the Olympic Games were held in Berlin. And Germany essentially used those Olympic Games to basically say, like, look at Germany, this is where we are, this is how great Germany is. And then we know exactly what came after those Olympic Games. The Germans ended up taking places in, they ended up taking Austria, they remilitarized the Rhineland, they went after Czechoslovakia, they went after Poland, they went after France, Netherlands, Belgium, and then Russia. Obviously, we know how all of that turned out. But it was like the world was like taking a blind eye to what was going on in Germany. And there were conversations, there were a lot of talk about boycotting the Olympics in Germany because they didn't know what this was going to do, because there was a lot of people saying, like, they a lot of people going into the Olympics did not like the Nazis. They did not like what the Germans were doing, but they didn't, you know, they couldn't go to war with them. They didn't want to risk another great war, which ended up coming anyway. And what we're dealing with now is an authoritarian country that is essentially threatening their neighbors, telling their neighbors, saying, you belong to us and we're going to take you back by force if necessary. And then they are also re educating, quote unquote, people, Muslim Uyghurs in Xinjiang. And they're basically saying, like, we're all Han Chinese in China. There's no Muslims, there's no Christians, there's no nothing except the Han Chinese. And, you know, I believe that there is good nationalism. If you have a love for your country, that is great. But what's going on in China right now is that ultra nationalism that we kind of saw before in Germany, where that ultra nationalism made them say, we need to start expanding because we need to know that everyone else can become what we are. And that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to go after Taiwan. They're putting down democracy in Hong Kong, even though they were not supposed to do that until 2047. Hong Kong, and maybe the reason they did that is because they thought by 2047 Hong Kong was going to be so used to what they were having that they were not going to go down easy. They were probably going to go down a lot harder because everyone would be looking at Hong Kong by 2047 and going, like, what the hell is China and Hong Kong going to do? But now we're looking at it as in the scope of, like, okay, so now that China took out Hong Kong, China's now looking toward their neighbors. They're looking at Taiwan, they're looking at Japan, they're looking at South Korea, they're looking at the islands in the South China Sea that they're literally claiming everything in the South China Sea. So this is not, the best conclusion to what we were looking at, but it's better than nothing. I have been saying for over a year since the pandemic began, and I believe if you go back on any of my other live streams, that talked about China, I'm pretty sure I've talked at least a couple of times about boycotting the 2022 Beijing Olympics. The last time that China held an Olympic Games was back in 2008. And I'm not too familiar with what happened there, so I won't talk about it that much. But that was the last time that China held these Olympics, and then now we're like, it's completely different, like 14 years later. So it is not something that we want to send our government representatives to endorse. So I believe that without punishing our Olympic athletes and without saying, basically endorsing what's going on in Beijing, in Xinjiang and Hong Kong, preventing our government representatives from going to represent the Olympic delegation, I believe that was the right move. I think that was the best move that the US government could have taken. And I am really happy that the Biden administration has done this. I think this is one of the best ideas that the Biden administration has done since the signing of the AUKUS Treaty or the AUKUS agreement. I don't even know if it was a treaty or not. That joint alliance between the United Kingdom and Australia, in which the United States basically allowed Australia to get nuclear submarines, acquire nuclear submarines. So I think this is the best move since the signing of the AUKUS Treaty that the Biden administration has taken. So very good on him for making this happen. Let's go ahead and read chat for a second before we move on to the next story. I'm in Saudi Arabia right now. There are rockets everywhere. Jesus. So Quackshot, yep, he's from South Korea, where he is from Florida, but is stationed at Humphreys in South Korea. I agree with you. They're trying to take out their adversaries. However, there's not. However, something not many take into factor is the fact that many of the general staff in the military of the PLA don't support leadership. We've never heard of that before. So, if any major conflict happens, can Xi Jinping rely on his generals? Possibly not. Xi Ping. Xi Ping? Is it? Are you sure? What does this really do, though, PG? Besides wagging our finger? Again, like I said before, it's not because yeah, it could look really minimal, especially if we're, still allowing our athletes. So what's the difference between this and I mean, yeah, it could be considered wagging our finger. That's depending on whether the rest of the world uh doesn't do anything. If our allies join in, then it's going to be a lot bigger than wagging our finger. It's going to be like, most of the West and maybe even a handful of other countries that aren't even associated with the other side wagging their finger and saying, like, hey, we don't support what's going on in Beijing. We don't support what's going on in Hong Kong. It's just that the United States, it's just that these countries are too afraid to do that. So if you want to look at it in the scope of like what is it actually going to do, yeah, it's probably not going to do that much. If you want to look at it in the scope of acknowledging what's going on and acknowledging that there are human rights abuses going on in Xinjiang, and that a lot of people now are so like I'm trying to figure out the word. They're so into like grabbed by China, like because China has their hands in literally everyone's pockets. Like the United States owes the Chinese like almost $2 trillion in national debt, and all these African countries are literally being debt trapped by China uh, for because the Chinese are financing infrastructure projects in those countries that they obviously cannot afford. So it's it really just depends on what kind of a finger or I'm sorry, I'm like three things going at once. It kind of just depends on the eyes that you're looking at. So, um, so okay, so we have okay, so let me go ahead and take a step away for one moment. I'm gonna be right back because I have to make a phone call. So I'll be right back. Okay, sorry. I got a phone call. I was just like, come on. Anyway, so let's go ahead and continue to look at what's going on in this story. So I have a CNN article. So it says the Biden administration will not allow send an official U.S. delegation in Beijing as a statement against China's ongoing genocide and crimes against humanity in Xinjiang. Pretty sure it's just going to say the same thing that it did before. Let me get this. There we go. That way you guys can see me. Well, actually, that works. Hell yeah, that's a lot better. Um, U.S. diplomatic, or actually, what I need to do is look at this. I want to see. I want to see what the Global Times is saying on this. I love the Global Times because they are so up their ass in China. Like it's literally straight up propaganda, Chinese propaganda. It's like the greatest thing to read. It's so freaking funny. Possibly nothing yet. Let's see. World clashes erupt at Brussels protest. U.S. Embassy in Tokyo warns of suspected racial profiling. Pure isolation. Oh yeah, Japan got another prime minister. Let me read chat since I was on the phone. The need have the rest of the U.S. military show up. Well, it won't be a raffle stomp. It will be a slow winning battle. And the fact that China would go broke without U.S. trade. I just don't think anybody is really worried about America anymore. Russia and China. Yeah, of course they're not worried about us. Um, da, 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 da. I think China can beat the U.S.'s ass, not with the Navy though. 24/7. Are you sure about that? POV, you're in China, whatever. PG Let's Play Microsoft Flight Simulator. Maybe, yeah. I still want to play use those F-18s and fly around. I disagree, but I can only tell but we can only tell by having a real war. Exactly. Like we can make all these assumptions about like how the US and Chinese military would compete against each other, but we won't know until that war starts. I actually texted my dad whenever the announcement came, whenever they said that, oh yeah, we're uh, uh, boycotting the Olympics. He was like, "Is it in China?" And I said, "Yep, Beijing." He said, "Figures, it'll probably be canceled anyway since World War III will be underway by that time." And I was like, "Yeah, yeah, true." Oh yeah, this was another thing. Iran held a unannounced air defense drill near one of their nuclear power plants. They said that there was a large explosion out like above the nuclear power plant, and it ended up being revealed that it was literally just the Iranian military uh blowing up a missile like over the nuclear plant, and they never announced anything. Do you think we have the manpower to defeat China in an actual war right now? Let me actually pull that up real quick. So there was something US military power. So I actually look at this. So we're gonna do this, and let's do here. So we got that, and then I'll put the global times back. So if you look at this, here's the overview of manpower. So let's open manpower for both China and the United States. If you actually look, so the United States has 1.4 million active duty personnel in the U.S. military. China has 2.185 million active duty personnel. And then the Chinese have 510,000 in reserve. So if we look, total military personnel is 3.3 million, and then US total military personnel is 2.2 million. So the biggest thing about this is that the United States, spends $800 billion, 700, $800 billion on our military every year. The Chinese only spend about 2 to $300 billion. So Money-wise, it's like, I mean, the United States has nearly $1 trillion in their military, while the Chinese still doesn't give their military that much money. And yeah, they do spend it, but most of that money, I believe, is going toward so if you actually look, financials. So defense budget $740 billion and external debt is $17.9 trillion. Yeah. Yeah, that is not accurate. That is not accurate, global firepower, because we are at about $30 trillion. Um, purchasing the PPP is definitely off. I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure like all of these are off right now. So yeah, $740 billion. What is this according to what year is through 2021? So yeah, I mean, even it even says that it's kind of off. $740.5 billion and then $178 billion for the Chinese military. So the United States has, you know, a vastly higher military spending than any other country. And the reason that this is going to prove useful is that whenever there is another global conflict, if there is something that is about to happen, like in Ukraine, like in Taiwan, that is going to prove either useful or it's going to, or if we end up losing, then that's like American Revolution 2.0 because oh yeah, we spend like nearly $1 trillion on our military every year and we just lost a war. Like I feel like we would end up like in the same situation as the Russian Empire in 1917. So thoughts on Ukraine? We will get to Ukraine in today's stream. I've been streaming for 30 minutes. We'll go ahead and talk a little bit more. So yeah, like the biggest thing that China outmatches us in right now is naval power. So 777 total assets in the Chinese Navy and the PLA Navy. And the United States only has 490 uh, uh, total assets: 11 aircraft carriers, 10 helicopter carriers, 92 destroyers, 0 frigates, 21 corvettes, 68 submarines, 13 patrol vessels, and 8 mine warfare. My prediction, watch this, is 777 assets, 2 aircraft carriers, 50 destroyers, 46 frigates, 72 corvettes, 79 submarines, 123 patrol vessels. Like, come on, China, and 36 mine warfare. So they're going to really be depending on patrol vessels and mine warfare as well as like the little blue men that they call it. Um that they basically depend on. And by the way, look at this. Look at this. China also has 660,000 paramilitary forces. They rank number 8 in the world. The United States has a total of 0. Paramilitary, they have more in their paramilitary force than they do in their own reserve force. So if you look at paramilitary forces and organizations are semi-military entities that can strengthen a given nation's fighting capability on the ground. That value is used in the final GFP ranking to further refine a nation's overall military strength. Some nations can field a frontline, reserve, and paramilitary force, while others not capable of sustaining reserves make paramilitary forces a vital component to its defense. Others do not officially support a paramilitary force, but may still call upon one. So the biggest one is Bangladesh. Jesus Christ, Bangladesh has 6.8 million troops in their military paramilitary force. Let's look, manpower. So they have 204,000 active duty personnel in their military, but they can call upon 6.8 million paramilitary forces. What the hell happened in Bangladesh to make them do that? I gotta head to work. I'll be back on stream in about 10 minutes. Slow day. The US is a total powerhouse for Navy. The China has the numbers, bad assets. Yeah, the US has actual good assets. So yeah, that's actually what I was going to say is that yes, the Chinese outmatch the United States in terms of total military assets, but it's a matter of whether those military assets are even capable of waging war against a guided missile destroyer or a like $15 billion aircraft carrier. That's the biggest thing about it is that the United States spends so much money on its military because our military is so advanced. The biggest thing that China has is that hypersonic missile that they could literally like send to us without warning. So that's threat number 1. And then number 2, they actually have pretty advanced anti-sea missiles, and that's why they're investing so much into their own navy is because they know they cannot win a land war against the United States because they will get their ass handed to. But if they are able to hold off our navy with their hypersonic missiles, uh, with their anti-ship missile technology, if they are able to do that, then they can totally prevent confrontation, a direct confrontation with the U.S. military, with the U.S. ground forces like the Marines, Army, uh, Air Force, anything. I mean, they probably won't even be able to stop our own Air Force. So spend so much money, but most bases are still trash. That's another story. So let's look at land forces before we move on. United States versus China. So here it is. I mean, we can just look at this. So power index, the United States ranks 1, China ranks number 3. Population, obviously the Chinese have 1.06 billion more people than us. Available manpower, the United States is vastly outmatched in that whenever the Chinese could literally call upon 752 million people, and the United States can only call upon 146 million people. Fit for service is 121 million to 617 million. Reaching military age annually doesn't matter. Active military personnel, 1.4 million to 2.1 million. And then act or reserve personnel, the United States actually has more reserve personnel than China, except the Chinese have way more paramilitary forces, as we can see down below. So that is the biggest thing. So that's about 1.1 million reserve slash paramilitary forces that the Chinese could call upon. Financials, but defense budget, we see that the United States has a vastly higher military spending than the People's Republic of China. External debt, this is way off right now. China does not have 1.5 billion trillion dollars, and the United States definitely does not have 17.9 trillion dollars of debt. Foreign reserves, 123 trillion or a billion for the United States, and apparently 3.2 trillion for the Chinese. So apparently the Chinese have a better amount on that. Purchasing power, $19.5 trillion for the United States, $25.4 trillion for the People's Republic of China. Total aircraft, this is what we're looking at. 13,233 for the United States. And look at that, 3,260 aircraft for the People's Republic of China. So that is a vastly higher amount. Obvious. I mean, yeah, I don't even know why I'm saying it like that. That is a cakewalk, I guess. Depending, I mean, the best thing that the Chinese have is literally technology that they have stolen from the United States because they copied the F-35 and then made it into their own stealth fighter, even though that stealth fighter is still probably one of the worst performing jets. And that's the other thing about the Chinese military. The Chinese military has not been in a war like the United States has been. The United States has been at war for 20 years. We've been in Afghanistan, we've been in Iraq, we've been in Libya, we've been in the Middle East because of ISIS. We have had our troops on the ground. We have had our forces in the skies. We have had our forces at sea for a long time, continuously since World War II. We had Vietnam. We had the first Gulf War. We had Panama. We had Grenada. We've had a lot of experience with war. The Chinese, they have not. Yes, they literally kicked ass in their own civil war, but that was a civil war. That was whether they could beat the opposing side in for control of their national government. The Chinese have not been in their own war except for back in the 90s whenever they went to war with Vietnam. And guess who won that one? Vietnam did. That was the last time that China has actually ever been to war. So they have all of this technology. They have all of these troops, but they have zero war experience. None of them have been to war. And if they have, last time that they were fighting, it wasn't even a shooting war. It was them going into the Himalayan mountains against the Indian military and then beating the crap out of each other with sticks, rocks, and like anything but a gun. That's the experience that they have. They are vastly outmatched by the United States in terms of military experience. Fighter aircraft 1,956 to 1,200. Dedicated attack aircraft 761, 371. Uh, Transports 945 to 264, but apparently China can call upon like a lot of their ocean liners to use trainers, special mission, helicopters. Oh, look at that. 902 helicopters for China and 5,436. I wouldn't consider Iraq and Afghanistan a W for America. Technically, the second Gulf War, if you're talking about between 2003 to 2011, that was a W for the United States. You're saying that it's a L because of what happened after, but whenever we withdrew, it took them about a couple of years before that devolved into the situation that it became. So, in some ways, if you want to talk about, okay, let me actually present it like this. The second Gulf War was against Saddam Hussein. We had two Gulf Wars against Saddam Hussein. Whenever we went to war the second time against Saddam Hussein, we beat the crap out of his military in like 3 days. Both times that we went to war with Saddam Hussein's military, they lost extremely quickly. So that's a W. Yeah, I'm talking if you're talking about the insurgency, that was about the nation building. But if you're specifically talking about the United States military defeating other militaries, we it was a cakewalk in Iraq the second time around because whenever we went in there, I mean that's what I mean it's literally called shock and awe. We went in there and it was a lightning war. It was like the Blitzkrieg. Whenever the Germans came in and then just like threw their tanks at the enemy and the other side had a zero time to react, that's a W. So the beginning of the war, that's a W. If you're talking about the insurgency, that was that's where it kind of gets a little ellish. um I was in from 914. I know my man. 914, what the hell is that? Do you consider Vietnam a win? Te- Some people are going to get mad at me for this. Technically, technically, the United States did not lose Vietnam because technically the United States did not lose Vietnam mainly because we withdrew before they lost. We were just like, "Up, we're out." Vietnam is an L, bro. Stop. I know. Vietnam was an L. Vietnam and Afghanistan were L's. But if you literally look at any other war the United States has been involved in since, like 7 out of 10 are W's. So land power 6,000, 1,000 tanks to 3,200 tanks. Armored vehicles 40,000 to 35,000, 1,500 to, oh yeah, look at that. They outmatch us in self propelled artillery. Towed artillery, we outmatched them by 100. Mobile rocket projectors, they outmatch us by 885. Does Trump have a better chance against Biden or Kamala if he runs in 24? I believe so. Fleet strength 490 to 777. We have 9 more carriers than they do. Helo carriers, we have 10 more than they do. Submarines, we have 11 less than they do. We have 42 more destroyers than they do. And given that most of these destroyers are extremely advanced, way more advanced than the Chinese, we have 0 frigates in our military, and they have 46. 21 corvettes, they outmatch us by 51. They have 110 more patrol vessels than we do. And then they have 28 more mine warfare vessels than we do. Logistics, we have a lot more airports, 13,000 airports, but most of those are civilian. Merchant marine. So yeah, this is the biggest thing. Merchant marines that they were going to be using. Consider this like patrol vessels slash naval transports because they're probably going to be calling upon these merchant marines to transport their troops. Labor force. Haha, look at that. Roadways, blah 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 blah. Resources. We have an oil advantage production over they do. We consume a lot more. Well, actually, really, we consume more oil than China. Huh. We do have more proven reserves of oil than the Chinese, and we have slightly more land than they do. So they're like basically the same size. We have a lot more coastline, and China has way more waterways, about 68,000 kilometers more. A war between the United States and China would be a disaster, to be honest. Do you think they're only going to use missiles and soldiers? Both have space forces and high tech weapons. End of the world. The world would get involved, and some of us would be drafted into this disaster. The American economy from World War II shows how pointless it is to look at a country's military power before they go to war. Yeah, true. Because the United States has proven that every time that there's been a major world conflict, that the United States basically kind of like rallies behind the US flag, and we prevail so much economic wise because we've always come out of these wars like way better economically than we have been before because we had the roaring 20s after World War 1. After World War 2, we had the huge economic boom in the 60s or in the 50s. Like it was like the 50s was a completely different era than any other era the United States has ever had. um as for being drafted, the biggest thing about if we were to go to war with China, people like me and a lot of people watching this right now, I highly doubt that we would be drafted unless the US mainland was under threat. If the US mainland was under threat by a Chinese invasion, a joint Chinese Russian invasion, then yeah, we're going to get drafted. If Hawaii was being invaded, if Alaska was being invaded, if Mexico was being invaded so they can invade through the south, then we're gonna get drafted. Or unless the war gets so bad to the point where it's like sending people into a meat grinder, essentially what happened in the game Fallout whenever the US and China go to war in that game. If it were to get that bad, yeah, we're gonna get drafted. But in terms of the military strength that we're looking at right here, active personnel, again, We're talking about 1.4 million active duty troops, along with 585,000 or 845,000 reserve personnel that are heavily trained, that have been to war, that have experience somewhere. I mean, whether they're a police officer, whether they've been in the military before, whether they've been to Afghanistan, whether they've been deployed. These are men and women that are highly trained. I mean, you can have your quips with the military. I mean, unless Mr. Who was it? My friend Quackshot. Quackshot, if you want to put, since you're an active duty troop, what is your thoughts on that situation? Like, do you feel that the United States is ready for that? Do you think that, like, compared to the Chinese, that we would be able to fare a lot better, even though that our troop numbers are less than theirs are? If it's a war for Taiwan, Americans will not be drafted. Even if it's a war for Ukraine, I'm pretty sure that Americans will not be drafted. Like, it would essentially, a nuke would have to go off in New York, Los Angeles, Miami, Chicago. Like, there would have to be something greater than 9/11 for either A, people to just like be rushing to the draft booths to join the military, or it would have to get so bad that we're basically sending men and women to a meat grinder, that we would be able to, that then at that point, yeah, we would have to draft. But it would have to get to a very severe point in order for us to even enact a draft. Because we learned from Vietnam that we're not going to just like go to war with someone and then just start drafting men and women just because we're trying to win this war. That didn't work that did not work in Vietnam, because we all know what happened whenever we started drafting kids, like 18-year-old kids that were just out of high school, to go fight a war. That did not end well, i.e., it was the year 1968. That's what happens whenever you draft kids for a war that they do not support. So I believe that if something were to happen, it would have to be something a lot worse than 9/11. And I don't want to jinx it. For the love of God, I don't want to jinx it. But that is my prediction. Either A, that would have to happen, or B, the United States mainland would have to be under direct threat. Sad Henry Kissinger noises. That's good. That's good. But we've been talking about this for about 50 minutes. Let's go ahead and talk about the next topic of this stream. On the Ukrainian front, grinding war and weary anticipation of invasion. After 8 years in the trenches, Ukrainian soldiers are resigned to the possibility that the Russian military, which dwarfs their own in power and wealth, will come sooner or later. Machine gun fire broke the stillness just after 8 p.m. when Captain Denis Brunsky was midway through the evening control. The shots came in sporadic bursts and were close close by, fired by Russian-backed separatists whose positions were obscured in the darkness. Only when the flash of a rocket-propelled grenade illuminated newly fallen snow did the captain break his stride, briefly pausing to take cover before moving on. This happens every night. Commander of the Ukrainian military's 25th Airborne Brigade, position along the front lines in eastern Ukraine. Sometimes it's much heavier. Sometimes it's like tonight. This is fine. Jesus Christ. This is what the war has been like for years, a slow, bloody grind that set in after both sides fought to a stalemate over territory seized by Russian backed forces in 2014. Now, Ukrainian and Western officials say something more ominous could be building. In recent weeks, they have warned that Russia was erecting the architecture for a significant military action, possibly even a full fledged invasion of Ukraine. U.S. intelligence officials have assessed that Moscow has drawn up plans for a military offensive involving an estimated 175,000 troops to begin as early as next year. Recent military recent satellite photos show a buildup in equipment, including tanks and artillery. President Vladimir Putin of Russia has countered that it was the Ukrainians with their American and Western European backers who were instigating a war, citing what he calls what he calls security threats to Russia, including NATO exercises in the Black Sea. Amid mounting anxiety, Mr. Putin and President Biden will speak by video conference on Tuesday, which seems to be tomorrow. The White House said Mr. Biden would reaffirm the United States' support for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. Mr. Putin has made his position clear. It is not we who are threatening anyone last week, and it is us, and accusing us of this, given the reality on the ground, or as we say, to shift the blame from the person who's sick in the head to the healthy one, is at minimum irresponsible. For the fighters dug into an ant farm of muddy trenches on both sides of the conflict in Ukraine, talk of a new war might seem puzzling. For them, the old one never ended. A 2015 ceasefire between the Ukrainian government and Russian backed forces in two separatist enclaves brought an end to the most serious hostilities in the conflict that has cost more than 13,000 lives, but it did not bring peace. Let me answer this call real quick, and I will be right back. Okay, I'm back. What is known as the line of contact separating the two sides regularly crackles with gunfire, punctuated with an occasional boom of artillery. A handful of Ukrainian soldiers is killed each month, mostly by sniper fire. There were 7 in September, 2 in October, and 6 in November. Last week, a 22-year-old soldier named Herikvin became the first killed in December. So far, soldiers on the front lines say that they have seen little of evidence of escalation beyond this largely slow moving war of attrition. Compared with the vicious fighting that preceded it, this is a holiday, several soldiers said. But after years of in the trenches, there are weary acceptance that the status quo cannot last forever, and the Russian military, which dwarfs their own in power and wealth, will likely come sooner or later. If that moment is now at hand, they said, so be it. I studied at university and my head is screwed on right, so I recognize perfectly well the danger the Russian army presents, that no one can guarantee that Putin or anyone else won't suddenly say forward, which is First Lieutenant Ivan Skuratsky. I can't say that last name. Slavic names are always kind of difficult for me. A stoic 30-year-old father of two who has been fighting in a war since it broke out in 2014. We are prepared for this turn of events because this is our job, and none but us is in a position to confront this threat. Are you scared of an open offensive? I just don't see that in people. The soldiers are on heightened alert anyway, aware that this is a period of explosive tensions. An errant bullet or mortar shell could be all that is needed to touch off a serious escalation, which is true. Even when fired upon, they are under strict orders not to respond unless absolutely necessary. On the night I joined the captain on patrol, forces under his command returned fire only once, just to let them know we're here. The thwomp of Ukrainian soldiers' grenade launchers silenced the machine gun fire on the other side, but only briefly. This really annoys the soldiers that we're not allowed to respond. Since August, 25th Airborne Brigade has been posted to an area on the outskirts of the Ukrainian town Radvika, known as the Promzona, a base built into the skeletal remains of a tire factory. The site of nasty fighting at the start of the war, the factory complex is now eerily silent, save for the rush of wind through bullet strafed passageways and the banging of loose metal sheeting. It abuts a neighborhood of country cottages, mostly just burned out shells now. The houses were abandoned quickly and long ago. Children's toys can be seen scattered in some yards, and offspring of left left behind family pets prowl over overgrown gardens. Snipers are a constant menace, and the walls of frontline positions are posted with photos of gruesome injuries suffered by those who drop their guard. Viewed through a handheld periscope, the landscape on the other side appears post-apocalyptic with blown out houses set amid thickets of twisted, leafless walnut trees, only an occasional puff. Although the fighters on the other side are no more than a few dozen meters away in some places, Ukrainian soldiers confess to knowing little about them. The dislike for their enemy is severe, though these were only once citizens were once citizens of a united country. Uh, these are the lowest strata of society who have not been able to find themselves in any other profession, kindergarten teacher said. Another company commander has studied his opponents from the perch in a corner of a factory building about 50 yards from where they're positioned. He said that 3 or 4 times a month, probably around payday, they start up the discotheque, get drunk, and take pot shots at his position. Scum gets wasted, steps outside probably to relieve himself, tosses a grenade, and goes back in. Jesus Christ. The Ukrainian military has made significant progress since 2014, since it nearly disintegrated in the face of a lightning operation by Russian forces to seize territory, first by annexing the Crimean Peninsula and then by fomenting a separatist takeover in the provinces of Donetsk and Luhansk. Ukrainian troops have been since fought alongside NATO forces in Afghanistan and Iraq, have trained with American military advisors. If a full-on attack comes, Ukrainian forces are ready to face it as long as as ready to face it as they've ever been. But even in this, he acknowledged it will not be enough to hold off the Russian. Uh, Hang on. Without a significant assistance from Western countries, specifically the United States. Some military analysts have said that faced with full invasion by vastly superior forces, Ukraine would at best manage an organized retreat, suggested the conflict might evolve to something akin to an insurgency, with Ukrainians fighting the Russians block by block and house by house, but the war would take a disastrous toll. This is the beast who tasted blood. Believe me, the losses are going to be horrible on both sides. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands on their side and on ours. For those on the front changed with paying attention, there is subtle but palpable change in the air, even if unnoticed by regular soldiers. In the last month or month and a half, everything has become more frequent. Shelling is more frequent from both military. Jesus Christ, how long is this article? Shelling is more frequent from artillery and small arms. Drones have started flying more often, and if before they did not stop drop bombs, they now have come up with a system for doing so. It's a full on activization. They have turned inside the inside of a bombed out apartment into an observation post on front lines near Marinka, 35 miles from Advika. Section of the wall is still just decorated with the former owner's pink wallpaper, but the living room has been blown out and now reinforced with sandbags and covered with green mesh netting. It's one thing. It's kind of like a double-edged sword with the New York Times. They always really like to describe what's going on. Uh, that's the end of their article. So, what are you guys' thoughts on what's going on in Ukraine? If the if Ukraine and Russia go to war, even though they have been at war since 2014, if the Russians invade the rest of Ukraine, should the United States and NATO get involved? Or should the Russians be able to take what land they want to take and then go on from there. Fly over to Nets and Flight Simulator. Actually, we'll do that in the next one. I actually will need to go in the next like 10 minutes. I was like, cool. Um, just Russia flexing muscles. US probably sit it out if it's just supporting the extremists. But it's not the extremists. It's the Ukrainian government. Like it's the government of Ukraine. What does the White House think about the situation in Ukraine? Apparently, they're already preparing for the possibility of an invasion. I actually heard on another article that essentially the Ukrainian military is, or the United States government, along with with her allies, is preparing a sanctions package in the event of an invasion of Ukraine. Like what that's how serious this is apparently getting and how close to war Russia and Ukraine are at right now. We are possibly looking at one of the most serious threats of of a war with Russia than we were looking at back in 2014. I'm pretty sure some of y'all are too young to remember what happened in 2014. You were probably too young. I remember it very vividly because I literally thought World War III was about to start. It was around the time I started it, like my passion for politics uh started, and I remember whenever the Ukrainian revolution happened. I remember whenever the war in Donetsk and Luhansk started. It was a very scary time. And it looks like now, the feeling that we were getting back in 2014, that every I mean, we have the COVID pandemic, we have Taiwan, we have Russia, we have all of these other situations that are going on right now that, make it, oh, well, this is nothing new. And it's not really, no one's going to take it seriously until it actually happens because we don't know whether the media is just trying to make a story to write on or if, tomorrow the Russians are going to start crossing and taking over Kiev. So it's, it's going to be a very it's basically a tight walk right now. It's a tightrope right now. We don't know whether this is going to actually turn into anything. Maybe we're going to go into 2022 and we won't go to war with Russia, or it could. Why would we die for Ukraine? Ukrainians can defend our own country. Such a large portion of the Ukrainian population is Russian. It makes sense the largest share would like to join Russia. But it's not a larger share. It's literally a lot of people from that very eastern part of Ukraine and Donetsk and Luhansk. That's why they separated because they didn't like that. They didn't like that the Ukrainian government turned down or that there was a change in government because the government at the time refused the free trade agreement with the European Union in favor of one with Russia. That's why this whole revolution started, is because West Ukraine was just like, okay, well, we should join the European Union. And on the East, mostly, I'm not even talking about East. It's like not even everything east of Kiev. It's like everything east of, I think it's like Mariupol. Like Mariupol, anything like within like a 100-kilometer radius of Mariupol in Luhansk and Donetsk, those are the areas that want to join. Okay, maybe not 100 kilometers, maybe like 50 to 100. Do they want to join the Russians though? West Ukraine does not want to join the Russians. That's why the Ukrainian Revolution happened, the Winter Revolution. East Ukraine does, or at least has favors toward Russia. But none of that is really, otherwise, we would see a larger share of Ukraine devolve into this insurgency, but it's not really where that's been happening right now. So it kind of just depends. So we could see an invasion, we could not, you know, but this all could just be like pussyfooting. But I personally, as someone who remembers everything whenever this started in Ukraine, whenever the Russians invaded Ukraine, whenever they took Crimea, whenever this insurgency started. Again, I remember when all of this started. It hasn't looked this serious since 2014. So if you're looking at Ukraine and going like, "Oh, this is pretty serious." This is how it felt in 2014. This is if you're feeling anything like that, that's what it felt like when this first happened. So, it's interesting to have this feeling again because I haven't felt this way about Russia and Ukraine since the revolution first happened. I doubt the US would enter a war without its allies. If it's against Russia, and if it's about Ukraine, I highly doubt the United States would go in it alone because that would be a NATO effort. NATO is already involved on the Ukrainian side. NATO is already training Ukrainian troops. NATO is already involved in this. So if a war does start in Ukraine, then it's going to involve NATO. NATO would get involved. The United States is not just going to go in there alone. There's no way that we could do that without NATO because it would end up dragging NATO into it anyway. So it would be sanctions are pretty much everything they can do. It's everything they can do aside from sending in troops. Like it would, but is it going? But if there is a military action, would it be like the phony war? Like, because the West is so weary right now because the West doesn't want to get involved into another global war. So could it end up devolving into something like the phony war, where, both sides technically are at war with each other, but they're not doing anything until one side takes something. Hopefully, Europe has learned its lesson from that. I'm not dying for the Ukraine. That's for sure. War against Russia means a war on the European theater. The Europeans won't back that. Yeah, it just depends. It depends. I gotta go ahead and leave. I apparently had a doctor's appointment that I didn't realize was today. So I'm gonna go ahead and head out. Maybe we can have another discussion about this. Maybe I'll have a couple of people on pro and against involvement in a Ukrainian war. Um, but yeah, to recap, essentially, the United States is diplomatically protesting. There will be no U.S. government representatives in Beijing in 2022, and that in essence, whenever it comes to Ukraine, it has not felt this scary in regards to Ukraine since 2014, an event that I specifically remember, that I remember paying attention to. The government reactions and what it's felt like geopolitically and diplomatically, it has not felt this way since 2014. And that's how close it is right now in Ukraine. So, guys, go ahead and leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you are new. If you guys want to see more content like this, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any streams whenever I do go live. Go ahead and do all of that, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thank you guys so much for watching this with me, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you guys so much for watching, and take care.